Okay, this is the last formal lesson in this algebra unit, and our goal today is I can to arrange, I can rearrange formulas. Okay, now when it comes to I can rearrange formulas, the thing is, the reason we study math is because it's used in other courses as well as in the real world. But in math, we're often asked to demonstrate your algebra skills. And in courses, especially science, this is true that you have to use some algebra in order to solve some of the science questions. Now, often in science, what they do is they have this triangle and they use that for manipulating, rearranging an equation that you can use. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest, that is not algebra. Okay, that's just a short form that science teachers use because they don't want to teach you the algebra part. Okay, so I don't want to see any of this triangle part when we're rearranging. Plus the formulas, I'm going to get you to rearrange. It'd be pretty hard to fit them into a triangle. All right, so the first thing that we need to do when we're doing this, and it has to do with, we're going to look at examples. So for instance, I have this equation, okay? It is a science equation and it's for density and it says D equals M over V. Now, it's density equals mass over volume. Now, I don't really care that this is, as a math person, that this is M stands for mass and V stands for volume. That doesn't concern me. All I know is I have this relationship between these, which will be three numbers. Okay, so the first question asks, solve for the following variables. Now, first of all, we're going to solve for the letter for the variable M. Okay, so I'm going to take, hopefully I'm going to take this, I'm going to clone that, and I know you can't do that. And I'm going to take my D. I cheat a lot when it comes to this. Copy, paste. Okay, so I have D equals MV. So this is the formula they're expecting me to rearrange for the letter M. So what I do is I treat the letter M as if it is my X. So for the variable they want me to solve, I treat it as if it is the variable X that we've been doing all along. And what I do then is I treat the letters D and V as almost like a number. So they are numbers because they're variables, but I treat them how they operate with my letter M. So the first thing, if I want to get M by itself, and I look at that, why isn't M by itself? Well, it's not by itself because it's being divided by this letter V. So remember, if I want to get rid of the letter V, I have to do the opposite operation. So in order to get rid of the letter V, the variable V, I need to multiply by V. Okay, so I'm dividing by V, so I need to do the opposite, which would be to multiply by V. So I'm going to bring up my pen here. And so what I'm going to do is I literally am going to multiply this side by V. And so that's like a V over 1. We kind of talked about that, some of us. Okay, and so that's going to stroke that off, and I'll just have one M by itself. But I can't just multiply one side by V. I have to multiply the other side by V as well. So really, I'm actually finished this question, other than I'm going to, you can see it says M is all that's left on this side. And on this side, I have either VD or DV. It doesn't matter which one I put first because they're being multiplied. Now, often this is like having X on this side. So often we like to write the variable we were supposed to solve for on the left-hand side. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, mathematically it's still fine in this position, but I'm just going to rearrange it. It looks a little bit nicer. Okay, so that's that question. Now the next one says solve for V. So this time again, I'm going to start with the original equation, which was D equals M over V. And this one's a little bit harder because V in this case is in the denominator. So I need to somehow get it in the numerator position. Now, one thing I can do, just like the last question, is I could multiply both sides by the v. And if I do that, you can see what happens, that I still get a VD on this side, and on the opposite side, that the V's are going to cancel each other out, and I'm left with just the M. Now, and so that's really what we just did over here. But my question asked to give me V by itself. So now how do I get V by itself over here? Well, it says V times D. So the opposite of multiplying by D would be to divide by D. Okay, so this one took a little bit more thinking on our part, a couple steps. So if I if I divide that side by D, I must also divide this side by D. And the reason we did that is now the D's are on the top and bottom, so they become 1. So I end up with 1V equals M over D. All right, so let's take a look at another question. Okay, this time we have a different equation, and this is again actually a physics equation. Okay, and this is what it is. So it has V subscript 2 equals V subscript 1 plus AT. Again, I'm not really too concerned about what this is. It's a velocity formula, by the way. But I want to rearrange it because in some of the questions that they will ask me to do in physics, for instance, they want it to say V1 equals. So just like the previous example, I'm going to take that equation, I'm going to copy it and then paste it. So that's what I'm working with. So this is what I'm starting with, this equation. And I want to have V1 by itself. So that's like my x. So that means I have to get rid of everything else on the same side. So what is on the same side as V1? Well, what's on the same side you can see is plus AT. Well, what's the opposite of adding AT? If you said subtracting AT, you're correct. So I need to subtract AT. Now, if I subtract AT on this side, I must do the same thing on the opposite side. So it's just treating AT as if it is a number, okay? It is a number, remember, because it's a variable, but I don't know what those numbers are for those variables. So finally, I'm just writing my final answer. So my final answer is I have V1, the ATs are canceled out, and I'm left with V subscript 2 minus AT. And again, if you want to have V1 first position, we can just take and literally flip that equation around. And we are finished. Now, the next variable they want me to solve with this equation is for A. Now, A, as you can see, is located here. And there's a few things going on with the A. Unlike the first example here for part A, um, the V1 was just something was being added to it. Here with my AT, you can see I'm multiplying and I have some adding going on. So if these were all numbers and the A was an X, what we would do is we would first get rid of the adding and subtracting and then do any dividing. So the first thing I need to do is to get AT by itself would be is I need to subtract V subscript 1 from both sides. And when I do that, I end up having V2, minus V1. And I should have put a little negative sign there, which I'll do. And that equals AT. Now remember, I'm after a by itself. So again, I'm going to highlight it so we can look at it. So I want it by itself. Why isn't it by itself? Well, it's being multiplied by t. The opposite of multiplying by t would be dividing it by t. Now, when I divide by t on the opposite side, everything has to be divided by t. And I end up having the equation v subscript 2 minus v subscript 1 all divided by t. And again, you could rearrange it if you so wish. Now you can see that formula is much more complicated than the original formula, but if I was finding acceleration, which is what A is, for a lot of questions, it makes sense to rearrange it one time and then use that equation. Okay, so let's look at some more examples of rearranging. Okay, so what they've done here is I'm supposed to solve for r, and my equation that I'm starting with is a volume formula. So here it is here. Here is r. Now, why isn't r by itself? Well, for numerous things, it's why it's not by itself. I have a pi, I have an h, I have a squared, I have a 3. So I have to get it by itself. So there's some of these steps you can do in different orders to a certain degree. Now, what is that pi and that h doing to that r? Well, right now, if I translate it, it says pi times r squared times h. So both the pi and the h are being multiplied by the r. So what I could do is I could divide both of them by pi h. Now notice I'm putting it on the denominator of with the 3, which means I would have to do the same thing to the other side. And when I do that, what I end up with is still kind of a mess. The pi and h is gone from the right-hand side, and I'm just left with an r squared on the top. I still have my 3 on the bottom. And on the on the left-hand side, I have v pi h. Now we almost have r by itself. We have a couple more steps actually, so I need to get rid of this 3. The 3 is dividing um, r is being divided by 3, so the opposite of dividing would be multiplying. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 3, and so same on this side. So that gets rid of my 3's on the right hand side, and now I'm left with an r squared. And on this side, I'm left with the 3v pi h. Now I do have r squared by itself, but it says to solve for r. So the next thing I have to know, what is the opposite of squaring something? Well, the opposite of squaring something is taking the square root. Now, if this was a number, there would be no big deal. We would take our calculator and take the square root of this number. Now, what we have, however, is variables. So what we end up with when we take the square root is we end up with this monster-looking thing that looks pretty ugly to our brains. So we end up with the square root of 3v divided by pi h, and that will equal our r. So it is kind of ugly looking. Okay, so we have one more to do, and I'm just going to stop the video and just put this last one in another one. Okay,